The reality of man is his thought. Abdu'l-Baha is recorded as saying this in the book Paris Talks. In selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, the master states, "The thoughts of man are the greatest power in the world." Paying attention to thought is important because thoughts aren't just fleeting. They're the architects of our lives. Our thoughts shape our emotions, actions, relations with others, how we show up in the world, and ultimately our reality. To repeat it once more, Abdu'l-Baha is recorded as saying, "The reality of man is his thought." Today, in the information age, one's thoughts are the target of external action, often subtle, sometimes nefarious. Today, one's mind and heart are under steady assault by entities that wish to influence attitudes, feelings, behavior. You've heard of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, the intergovernmental military alliance composed of a few dozen member states. NATO published a document in 2020 called Cognitive Warfare, describing how all humans are targets of propaganda meant to prejudice them against a designated foe. This type of strategy is referred to by some as fifth-generation warfare, or the battle of perceptions and information. Combat fought not against standing armies or even physically, but against the minds of citizens. Not just foreign citizens, but a nation's own people. Corporations, governments, and other groups are intent on capturing your mind and heart for various reasons, which is why it is useful to become familiar with this subject. You and I have God-given goals to pursue, and we might be thrown off course if we fail to remain conscious daily of the importance of cultivating certain habits of thought, if we fail to appreciate that powerful vested interests pursue objectives that treat us like pawns, if we neglect to keep external forces at arm's length. Traditional media has always been able to play a gatekeeping role, a narrative-setting role, to decide what information is shared and how it is framed. We depend on journalism to help us make sense of events. Yet, across the generations, observers have recognized the tendency of news organizations to misrepresent reality. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, wrote, "The man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he who knows nothing is nearer to truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods and errors." Unlike in Jefferson's era, our modern purveyors of information are able to influence perception like never before, utilizing the most powerful tools that mankind has developed. And these tools are becoming more sophisticated by the day. Persuasion and propaganda are wielded by a range of actors. To paraphrase the words of investigative journalist Cheryl Atkinson, nearly every bit of content that crosses our path is put there for a reason, often by entities that expended significant resources to do so. The internet, social media, computing technology and applications, artificial intelligence, these things are regularly finding more capable and more subtle ways to prey upon the attention of the individual and to distort reality. Equipped with troves of data so vast that you and I cannot quantify even a fraction of it, supplied by a technological machine that tracks and traces everything we do online, that monitors every location visited by our electronic devices, whether in cyberspace or in the physical world. This technological ecosystem knows more about you than you realize. Your record of online activity is packaged up and sold to third parties, often without your knowledge or even sometimes your consent. Today's sophisticated practices of information curation and propaganda require that we equip ourselves for intellectual self-defense, lest we become indoctrinated by the narrative of the moment. One aim of this presentation is to encourage the practice of neutrality and skepticism when confronted with claims of any sort, no matter the source, until we have been able to corroborate such claims. This is one habit related to the pursuit of truth. We should not automatically believe things without verifying the evidence. Remaining neutral and skeptical is a challenging posture to hold while being confronted with a stream of emotionally provocative information, or when so many around us have been convinced of narratives or claims that they have not verified but believe nonetheless. The human tendency to remain part of the group, to avoid standing out or potentially disappointing or upsetting people, can result in conformity and groupthink, or in censoring our own questions before we utter them, which produces a host of problems. So, aim one of this presentation is to encourage the habit of skepticism, neutrality, and examining evidence for claims rather than relying on the assurances of other people. Another aim of this presentation is to advocate that we redouble our efforts to align our personal expression with the wisdom found in the Bahá'í writings regarding utterance, and to steer away from topics that the faith cautions us against. Many of us here live in societies in which individuals are accustomed to casually declaring opinions on any and every subject in almost all settings, which is a path littered with pitfalls if you're hoping to unify people. Today's information age immerses us in stories of division and despair on a daily basis. It can be inaccurate, destabilizing, and it might provoke us in such a way that we temporarily forget the counsels of the faith regarding the risks of commenting indiscriminately on matters that can lead to arguments or alienation, thus creating obstacles between ourselves and others, potentially hampering progress in some areas, such as in the attainment of some of the objectives of the faith. In this information age, when external forces attempt to manipulate us into thinking and behaving in ways they desire, in ways which might not be good for you or for the rest of society, it is vital to remember passages of guidance such as this one, written on behalf of the Universal House of Justice. The aim of the Baha'is is to reconcile, to heal divisions, to bring about tolerance and mutual respect among men. And this aim is undermined if we allow ourselves to be swept along by the ephemeral passions of others. Should Baha'is react anxiously to media reports and to current events? Can you even believe what you see? I submit to you the confounding factor that deceptions have always been promoted by elements of the power apparatus for various reasons. We sometimes cannot discern fact from fiction, even if news organizations file reports with apparent confidence. It might reduce your despair or stress level if you avoid becoming caught up in current events. We don't really know exactly why some so-called newsworthy things get covered. For instance, whether certain news stories on political scenarios reflect transparent, organic developments, or whether news outlets are being used by sources within the power apparatus to present a bluff or distraction meant to achieve certain ends, perhaps keep some nation or faction off balance, or to engage in performative theatrics for one's own constituency, or to alarm investors so as to tank the stock market so that insider trading can take place, and so on. The renowned intellectual Noam Chomsky had many fabulous insights, including this one. The general population doesn't know what's happening, and it doesn't even know that it doesn't know. Sigmund Freud was a well-known psychologist whose career was focused on the mind, on understanding behavior, and motivation and influences. One of Freud's followers was his own nephew, Edward Bernays, who initially worked as a journalist and press agent, often utilizing insights from Freud's body of work. Bernays was then hired by the U.S. government's Committee on Public Information to influence attitudes in support of U.S. participation in World War I, which Americans had been reluctant to get involved with. Bernays later referred to his efforts to propagandize his own countrymen as psychological warfare. Bernays is sometimes called the father of public relations. He used insights from Freud and others to help the government and later private companies to control the minds of others, to use public relations and propaganda to shift the opinions and the actions of people without their awareness or consent. Bernays, who later wrote several books detailing his work, said that manipulating people is an important element in democratic society. Bernays stated that manipulators constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Does this seem like a good idea to you? Hidden elements behind our elected representatives, exerting influence and making decisions with no accountability or public awareness? Are citizens being misled, therefore, if they accept at face value the statements that government and media report? Bernays wrote, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." Bernays, in that quotation, was not attempting to fabricate insights or exaggerate for effect. He had a great deal of experience across many decades, helping businesses and government agencies to implement exactly the recipe that he illustrated in that last quotation. Bernays played a central role in advancing the practice of corporate and state propaganda early in the 20th century, helping to lay a sophisticated foundation for the mind control systems and techniques that are prevalent now. In this era, we are bombarded with information from all directions. Sometimes multiple sources convey identical claims, making the claims appear more certain or more valid, regardless of whether they are true. Listen to this former editor of the Washington Post, Phil Gramm, who was proud to say that the media's job is to mobilize consent for the policies of the government. If you had to pick, does a news organization that says it mobilizes consent for government policies sound like it's telling you the truth or promoting a narrative? Truth is almost beside the point when communications experts know that a large percentage of the population will automatically believe a statement and not bother to verify it. If you can get a critical mass of people to believe one thing, other perspectives become easily marginalized. With Graham's assistance, the use or manipulation of journalists by the Central Intelligence Agency became a widespread practice. Graham and many others in media were hired and paid through a CIA program called Operation Mockingbird. The purpose of the program was to influence or exploit journalists to present the public with narratives. When Operation Mockingbird became known to the public, it was supposedly shut down by the government, but it doesn't matter. Today, the manipulation of news sources is much more in the open. Look closely at the analysts, pundits, experts, and commentators that the news outlets turn to for information, and so many of them are, quote, former members of one intelligence agency or another. It is vital to learn how to remain skeptical or neutral in the information age. Yet it is alarmingly easy to get swept up in a narrative, in propaganda, in an official-looking news report that might amount to merely a series of statements or claims, perhaps unsupported by any evidence whatsoever. Often we automatically accept such statements or claims, perhaps especially when they are delivered to us through an official-looking platform or individual. Why are we so easily convinced of something, willing to believe it even without verifying the proof? Partly this is due to the power of story. Human beings have, for thousands of years, transferred knowledge and stayed alive through difficult times with the help of stories. We are equipped for this kind of communication, and so we are quite accepting of receiving information in this fashion. In the same way that when we go into a movie theater, we suspend our judgment and accept the story we're being shown, we also can yield to the same tendency of automatic belief when we're watching the news or a presentation of any kind. In the modern era, we are accustomed to verifying our personal and wider reality through the legitimization of broadcast media. For the most part, we are oblivious to the fact that we reflexively accept and trust the depictions provided to us through such channels. We often assume that these channels or platforms have our best interests in mind. The reporters seem professional and responsible. We scarcely perceive the editorial parameters that news channels set around each topic, and therefore we limit our own understanding of a topic to such parameters, often without realizing it. We assume that professional news organizations have done the requisite digging for facts, are being honest and transparent, and we are content with the results of their supposed investigations. We are thus easily taken advantage of by the sponsor that has underwritten the program or information we are consuming, or the faction that has influenced the framing of the story. One of the negative effects of this pattern is to bias people for or against certain ideas or situations. We automatically come to adopt a particular position based on no actual verification or research of our own. And usually we don't even realize this. We often hold a particular belief simply because we heard someone say it or multiple people repeat it and it made an impression. This kind of behavior is antithetical to the independent investigation of truth. Wouldn't you agree? Baha'u'llah's counsel in the hidden words is, "See with thine own eyes and not through the eyes of others," and "Know of thine own knowledge and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor." Abdu'l-Baha said, "God has given man the eye of investigation by which he may see and recognize truth. He has endowed man with ears that he may hear the message of reality, and conferred upon him the gift of reason by which he may discover things for himself. This is his endowment and equipment for the investigation of reality. Man is not intended to see through the eyes of another, hear through another's ears, nor comprehend with another's brain. Each human creature has individual endowment, power, and responsibility in the creative plan of God. Therefore, depend upon your own reason and judgment, and adhere to the outcome of your own investigation. Otherwise, you will be utterly submerged in the sea of ignorance and deprived of all the bounties of God." To independently investigate truth, we must carefully assess sources of information in order to identify the ones that are most responsible, trustworthy, and helpful. The sources that are attempting to examine reality and serve the public, rather than to convince the public to adopt a certain point of view. I would like to draw attention to a few more quotations from the Baha'i writings that I believe pertain to the notion of evaluating claims and sources of information, of maintaining a posture of skepticism or neutrality in the pursuit of truth. Just for a moment, let's leave the current conditions that we live in and look to the future. Shoghi Effendi will paint a picture for us. The beloved guardian, speculating about certain aspects of a future world commonwealth of nation-states, said this about the field of journalism in the future: "The press will, under such a system, while giving full scope to the expression of the diversified views and convictions of mankind, cease to be mischievously manipulated by the vested interests, whether private or public, and will be liberated from the influence of contending governments and peoples. Shoghi Effendi clearly envisages that the field of journalism will evolve to be independent in the future and not captured by wealth and power as is the case today. It is evident, as well, that his words depict an era that has not yet arrived. His description about the future condition of journalism stands in direct contrast to today's reality. When attempting to understand current realities, I submit to you that it is vital to recall this sentence from the Universal House of Justice. It must be remembered that there are interests which manipulate the course of events. When I become aware of supposedly natural and spontaneous trends in popular culture, when I observe what is being foisted on viewers by the 24-hour news cycle, I often remember this caution from the Universal House of Justice. It must be remembered that there are interests which manipulate the course of events. I also appreciate and value the following insight from Abdu'l-Baha. Glory be to God! What an extraordinary situation now obtains, when no one, hearing a claim advanced, asks himself what the speaker's real motive might be, and what selfish purpose he might not have hidden behind the mask of words. This passage reminds me that if I am not alert, I might find myself easily deceived by false claims. The foregoing quotations, I believe, clearly support the notion that there are hidden agendas orchestrated and pursued by vested interests. It is important, when bombarded with so much stimuli in this information age, to protect one's mind and heart from being swept up in the ubiquitous, powerful, false narratives that are devised by self-interested entities who wish to gain an advantage over people in order to advance selfish purposes. The beloved guardian's wife and helpmate, Ruhia Khanum, spoke of his vigilance in this way. Shoghi Effendi was the keenest observer of political events and kept abreast of all happenings. His intelligence and analytical faculties did not permit him to lull himself into any false complacency induced by the rather childish idea people sometimes have of what faith means. He well knew that to have faith in God does not mean one should not use one's mind, appraise dangers, anticipate moves, make the right decisions during a crisis. To independently investigate truth, it is useful to assume that powerful interests are attempting constantly to persuade you of narratives that benefit themselves or some benefactor, and that such entities are not necessarily trying to enlighten you or benefit you. In fact, you might be regarded by them as merely a pawn. In the game of chess, a competitor will unhesitatingly sacrifice as many pawns as is necessary in order to achieve his objective. Recall what I said at the top of this presentation about NATO. The news programs will portray NATO as an alliance with upstanding intentions. Baha'is have positive feelings about collective security. News programs won't tell you that NATO countries, like their adversaries, strive to inspire your mind with belligerent attitudes about some other entities. If you had to choose, does that kind of behavior remind you of sober fact-sharing in the spirit of investigation and consultation to produce enlightenment? Or does it sound more like anxious narrative spreading meant to manufacture your consent for plans of aggression? I am not commenting on specific geopolitical conflicts. I am simply saying, in the Baha'i faith, the ends do not justify the means. The ends must be noble. The means must be noble. Remaining skeptical and neutral while pursuing truth, basing our opinions on evidence, is indispensable for navigating this information age that we're living through. These habits help us to avoid distraction and to keep our focus on building up the Bahá'í model in order to create pathways leading towards the prosperity of humankind. Remaining skeptical and neutral helps us to avoid being engulfed, co-opted, and neutralized by Machiavellian strategies now being employed by forces across the globe. Otherwise, facing a fire hose of information and content, we are easily overwhelmed, misled, and thrown off course. Why am I pestering you so much about the control being exerted today over people's thoughts? The reason is, as I mentioned in the first minute of this presentation, that according to Abdul Baha, the thoughts of man are the greatest power in the world. Don't allow your greatest power to be diminished or taken away. When I see Baha'is expressing anxiety on social media about political developments and current events, I think to myself, are we placing hope in a system that cannot, in the end, ever improve enough to satisfy us, but will always let us down? It is perhaps not a useful investment of our time to be engaged in dwelling and opining on divisive and intractable matters. The current system, as far as I can tell, offers no lasting solutions for humanity, even though a small fraction of the worldwide population believes it is materially secure. We might have private observations about political parties or trends, about specific politicians or other individuals in the public eye. We should recall what Shoghi Effendi wrote. Let them refrain from associating themselves, whether by word or by deed, with the political pursuits of their respective nations, with the policies of their governments, and the schemes and programs of parties and factions. In such controversies, they should assign no blame, take no side, further no design, and identify themselves with no system prejudicial to the best interests of that worldwide fellowship, which it is their aim to guard and foster. Ultimately, the spiritual transformation of a critical mass of humanity will have to take place to manifest a new paradigm. Abdul Baha said, "Peace must first be established among individuals until it leadeth in the end to peace among nations." Abdul Baha said to some friends in Haifa in June 1919, "Not until the cause of universal peace becomes a personal, religious conviction will it prove to be permanent. Diplomacy is impotent. The all-powerful Word of God must establish it and make it a living, potent, and lasting factor in the world. Hearts must be purified, and no trace of revenge, enmity, and rancor must linger in any heart until peace shall prove to be permanent." Lasting spiritual progress appears to depend on a significant change of culture, which starts with large-scale individual transformation. Many of our current labors are focused on creating the foundation for this. It will be a long-term process that will have to continue to gather steam after our lifetimes. We can all, meanwhile, find some way to serve the divine plan and to attempt to make an impact within our networks and wherever else our initiatives take us. One urgent task for all of us, however, is to diversify our news and information sources as much as possible, to scrutinize and question claims, to be conscious and deliberate about pursuing truth each day, and to make a habit of practicing skepticism and neutrality toward information spreading platforms and content factories of all kinds.